I was pouring my morning coffee when I heard the sharp rap on my front door that would change everything about my peaceful life in Riverside, California. The woman standing on my porch looked exactly like the type who would complain about lawn height being a quarter-inch too long. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it probably gave her a headache, and her lips were pressed into a thin line that suggested smiling was something other people did. She clutched a leather-bound folder against her chest like it contained state secrets. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association," she announced, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that comes from running school bake sales and neighborhood watch programs. "Are you Mr. Peterson?" "That's me." "Connor Peterson. Mr. Peterson, we need to discuss your fountain." She said fountain the way most people would say toxic waste dump. I glanced back at my front yard where my beautiful three-tiered fountain bubbled peacefully. The sound of cascading water creating a pleasant ambient noise that I'd specifically installed for that exact purpose. I'd spent $3,000 on that fountain, carefully selecting one with the right flow rate and basin design to create a consistent, soothing sound. "What about it?" Patricia's nostrils flared slightly. "It's creating an unacceptable noise disturbance. I've received multiple complaints from neighbors about the constant sound. According to our HOA bylaws, Section 12, Subsection 4, no resident may install or maintain any fixture or decoration that creates unreasonable noise levels that disturb the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warm liquid buy me a moment to process this nonsense. Multiple complaints. I've lived here for 2 years. The fountain's been running for 3 months. Nobody said anything to me directly. "Well, they've said something to me," Patricia snapped. "And as HOA president, it's my responsibility to enforce community standards. The fountain needs to be turned off during the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. at minimum. Preferably, it should be removed entirely." This was when I felt my jaw tighten. I'd done my homework before installing that fountain. "Patricia, I don't think you understand. That fountain serves a specific purpose. We're 300 feet from Highway 91. The traffic noise from that highway is constant, especially during rush hour. The fountain's water sound masks that noise. It's actually making things quieter for everyone, not louder." She waved her hand dismissively. "That's not relevant to the HOA complaint. The issue is the fountain noise itself. Actually, it is relevant. There's a city ordinance in Riverside, Municipal Code Section 7.30.040, that specifically allows residential noise mitigation features when the property is within 500 feet of a major roadway. My fountain qualifies as a noise mitigation feature." Patricia's face reddened slightly, which I took as a small victory. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to know local ordinances. "I'll have to verify that with the city," she said stiffly. "Please do. I have all the documentation inside." I checked with the city planning department before I installed it. They confirmed it was not only legal but actually encouraged as a quality of life improvement. "We'll see about that." Patricia turned on her heel and marched back to her white SUV, which was parked in front of my house at an angle that suggested she'd been too angry to park properly. I closed the door and leaned against it, already feeling the beginning of what I suspected would be a long, exhausting fight. My fountain wasn't loud. It produced about 45 decibels of sound from 10 feet away, roughly equivalent to a quiet library or a running refrigerator. The highway, by contrast, generated anywhere from 60 to 75 decibels during peak traffic times. The next morning, I found a formal letter in my mailbox. The HOA was demanding I attend a hearing in 2 weeks to address the ongoing noise violation. The letter was printed on official letterhead and signed by Patricia Henderson in flowing script that probably took her 5 minutes per signature. I called my neighbor, Mike Santos, who lived 2 houses down and had always seemed like a reasonable guy. We'd shared beers during last summer's block party. "Mike, it's Connor. Quick question. Has my fountain been bothering you?" There was a pause. "Your fountain?" "No, man, I actually like it. When I'm doing yard work, it's kind of nice background noise." "Why?" "Patricia Henderson from the HOA says she's gotten multiple complaints." Mike laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Let me guess. She showed up at your door with her little folder and her attitude?" "That's the one." "Connor, Patricia complains about everything. Last month she tried to fine the Johnsons because their dog barked twice. Twice. She measured it. The month before that, she went after the Ray's family for having the wrong shade of beige on their window trim. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But I did worry. That evening, I drove down to City Hall before it closed at 5 p.m. The planning department was on the second floor, a maze of cubicles and file cabinets that smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. A young woman named Jessica helped me at the counter. "I need documentation about noise mitigation ordinances near major roadways," I explained. She typed on her computer for a moment. "Are you near Highway 91? About 300 feet. Okay, so you'd fall under Municipal Code 7.30.040. That allows residential properties within 500 feet of highways, railways, or major arterial roads to install noise mitigation features without requiring special permits, as long as the feature itself doesn't exceed 60 decibels measured from the property line." "Can I get a copy of that code, plus any documentation about permitted noise mitigation features?" Jessica printed out several pages and highlighted the relevant sections. "Is someone giving you trouble about this, HOA?" She winced sympathetically. "Good luck. We get a lot of calls about HOA disputes. Make sure you document everything." I took her advice seriously. Over the next few days, I borrowed a professional decibel meter from my friend Tom Chambers, who worked in construction. I measured the fountain from every angle at different times of day. The readings were consistent, between 42 and 48 decibels, well below the 60 decibel limit. Then I measured the highway noise. Without the fountain running, the traffic noise at my front porch ranged from 65 to 73 decibels during rush hour. With the fountain running, the perceived noise level dropped significantly. The constant, pleasant white noise of the water masked the irregular, jarring sounds of trucks and motorcycles passing by. I documented everything with photos, video recordings with audio, and written notes. I even created a simple chart showing the decibel readings at different times of day. The HOA hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. in the community center, a squat building with beige siding that matched every other building in the neighborhood. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documentation and a flash drive containing my audio recordings. The community center's main room had been arranged with a long table at the front where Patricia sat with 2 other board members. About 20 folding chairs faced them, and to my surprise, about half of them were already filled with my neighbors. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel, which seemed unnecessarily dramatic for a small HOA meeting. "We're here to address the noise complaint filed against 2847 Meadowbrook Drive, the residence of Connor Peterson." I stood up. "Before we begin, I'd like to present evidence that my fountain is not only legal but actually beneficial to the community." Patricia's lips pursed. "Mr. Peterson, you'll have an opportunity to speak when called upon." With respect, Patricia, this is a hearing about my property. I think I should be able to present my case. One of the other board members, an older man named Gerald Winters, nodded. Let him speak, Patricia. That's only fair. Patricia looked like she'd bitten into something sour, but she gestured for me to approach the front table. I connected my laptop to the projector and pulled up my presentation. My fountain produces between 42 and 48 decibels of sound, measured from the property line. That's quieter than a normal conversation, which is typically 60 decibels. It's also well below the city's limit of 60 decibels for noise mitigation features. I clicked to the next slide, which showed the city ordinance. Riverside Municipal Code 7.30.040 specifically permits noise mitigation features for residential properties within 500 feet of major roadways. My house is approximately 300 feet from Highway 91. Patricia interrupted. The ordinance doesn't specifically mention fountains. It doesn't have to. It refers to any fixture or feature designed to mask or reduce perceived traffic noise. A fountain qualifies. I confirmed this with the city planning department. I held up the printed documentation from Jessica. What Patricia isn't telling you, I continued, turning to address the other residents in the room, is that the highway noise at my property ranges from 65 to 73 decibels during peak hours. That's louder than a vacuum cleaner running constantly in your living room. The fountain masks that noise, making it more pleasant for everyone in the area. I played an audio recording I'd made. First, just the highway noise, cars whooshing past, the occasional truck rumbling by. Then, with the fountain running, the traffic noise became much less noticeable, blending into the background. Mike Santos stood up. I live 2 houses down from Connor. Since he installed that fountain, I've actually noticed the highway noise less when I'm outside. I don't know what complaints Patricia received, but she didn't get one from me. A woman named Rachel Kim, who lived across the street, also stood. I walk my dog past Connor's house every evening. The fountain is lovely. It's not disruptive at all. Patricia's face was growing redder by the minute. I've received written complaints from concerned residents. Can you show us those complaints? I asked. I'd like to know who's been disturbed by my fountain. HOA complaint records are confidential. Gerald cleared his throat. Actually, Patricia, when a complaint leads to a formal hearing, the accused party has a right to see the complaints. That's in our bylaws. Patricia's hands gripped the edge of the table. Fine, I'll provide redacted copies. Redacted, I repeated. You mean you'll black out the names? For privacy purposes, yes. Something felt off about this. Patricia, I'm starting to wonder if these complaints actually exist. The room went quiet. Patricia's face went from red to almost purple. How dare you question my integrity? I'm not questioning your integrity. I'm questioning whether you received legitimate complaints or whether you just personally don't like my fountain. The third board member, a middle-aged woman named Susan Torres, spoke up for the first time. Patricia, we should table this discussion until you can provide documentation of the actual complaints. If we're going to potentially force a homeowner to remove a $3,000 feature from their property, we need solid grounds. Patricia looked betrayed. I'm the president of this board. And we're the other board members, Gerald said quietly. Susan's right. Bring us the complaint documentation and we'll reconvene. I gathered my materials, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and unease. I'd won the first round, but something told me Patricia wasn't the type to back down easily. 2 days later, I received an email from Patricia with 3 PDF files attached. Each was a complaint form, supposedly from different neighbors. But as I read through them, something jumped out at me. The writing style was identical. Each complaint used the same phrases: unreasonable noise disturbance, peaceful enjoyment, community standards. The complaints were supposedly from residents at different addresses, but they all sounded like they'd been written by the same person. I forwarded the email to Mike and asked him to take a look. He called me within an hour. "Connor, these are fake. Or at least, I know for a fact one of them is. The complaint's supposedly from 2851 Meadowbrook. That's the Petersons' house. They're in Europe for 3 months visiting family. They've been gone since before you even installed your fountain." My stomach dropped. "Are you sure? Positive? I'm getting their mail for them. Want me to reach out to the other addresses?" "That would be helpful." Over the next few days, Mike did some detective work. The second complaint was supposedly from an elderly couple who confirmed they'd never filed any complaint. They barely left their house and hadn't even noticed the fountain. The third complaint claimed to be from a family with young children who said they actually loved the fountain because it helped their kids sleep better at night with the white noise. "Patricia forged these complaints," Mike said when he came over that Saturday afternoon. We were sitting on my back patio, and ironically, we could hear the highway traffic fairly clearly from there since my fountain was in the front yard. "That's fraud," I said slowly. "Falsifying HOA complaints to harass a homeowner. What are you going to do?" That was the question. I could confront Patricia directly, but I doubted that would accomplish anything except making her defensive. I could report it to the other board members, but without solid proof, it would be her word against mine. "I need to be smart about this," I said finally. "Document everything, gather evidence, and then present it in a way that can't be disputed." The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing. I contacted each of the homeowners who'd supposedly filed complaints and asked if they'd be willing to attend the meeting or provide written statements. 2 of them agreed to come in person. The Petersons, who were still in Europe, sent a notarized email statement confirming they'd been out of the country. Tuesday evening arrived, and the community center was packed. Word had spread about the fountain dispute, and apparently it had struck a nerve with many residents who were tired of Patricia's heavy-handed approach to HOA management. I arrived with Mike and the 2 homeowners who'd agreed to testify. Patricia's expression when she saw them was priceless. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then opened again like a fish out of water. Gerald called the meeting to order. "We're here to continue the discussion about the fountain complaint at 2847 Meadowbrook Drive. Patricia, you provided complaint documentation. Connor, you requested this meeting to respond to those complaints." I stood up. "Thank you, Gerald. I've had a chance to review the complaints Patricia provided. I've also had a chance to speak directly with the homeowners who supposedly filed those complaints." I gestured to the 2 people sitting next to Mike. "This is Dorothy Chen from 2855 Meadowbrook and Robert Marsh from 2843 Meadowbrook. According to Patricia's documentation, they both filed formal complaints about my fountain." Patricia's face had gone pale now, all the previous redness draining away. Dorothy stood up. She was a small woman in her 70s, but her voice was firm. "I never filed any complaint. I didn't even know there was a complaint process. Connor came to my door last week and showed me a form with my name on it. That's not my signature, and I certainly never wrote those words." Robert nodded. "Same here. I've never had a problem with Connor's fountain. Honestly, I barely notice it." I pulled out another document. The third complaint was supposedly from 2851 Meadowbrook, the home of David and Martha Peterson. They've been in France since August visiting their daughter. Here's their statement, notarized at the American Embassy in Paris, confirming they never filed any complaint and have been out of the country since before the fountain was even installed. The room erupted in murmurs. Susan Torres looked shocked. Gerald's expression had gone from friendly to stern. "Patricia," Gerald said slowly, "did you fabricate these complaints?" Patricia stood up so quickly her chair fell over backward. "This is ridiculous. I did no such thing. Someone must have forged my paperwork." "Your paperwork," I said. "So you're admitting you created these documents?" "No. I mean, yes, I created the forms, but the complaints were real. Someone must have, I don't know, changed them or something." Susan shook her head. "Patricia, these were the files you sent directly from your email. Are you claiming someone hacked your email to frame you?" "I don't know. But I'm not going to sit here and be accused of fraud." Patricia grabbed her leather folder and stormed toward the door. "If you leave, we'll have to vote to remove you as board president," Gerald called after her. Patricia froze at the doorway. For a moment, I thought she might turn around and try to salvage the situation. Instead, she pushed through the door and disappeared into the parking lot. The meeting continued without her. The board voted unanimously to dismiss all complaints against my fountain and to formally apologize for the harassment. They also voted to remove Patricia as president pending an investigation into the falsified documents. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The following weekend, I woke up to find my fountain had been vandalized. Someone had poured concrete mix into the basin, completely ruining the pump and clogging the entire system. The damage was extensive, easily $2,000 to repair. I called the police immediately. Officer Jennifer Ramirez arrived within 20 minutes, a professional woman in her 30s who took the vandalism seriously. "Any idea who might have done this?" she asked as she photographed the damage. "I have a strong suspicion, but I don't have proof," I admitted. I explained the situation with Patricia and the HOA dispute. Officer Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. "We'll file a report. If you had any security cameras that might have caught something, that would help." I didn't have cameras, but my neighbor Mike did. His Ring doorbell camera faced the street and might have caught someone approaching my house. Mike pulled up the footage that afternoon. At 2:30 a.m., a white SUV had parked in front of my house. The license plate wasn't clearly visible, but the make and model matched Patricia's vehicle. A figure in dark clothing had gotten out, spent about 10 minutes at my fountain, and then driven away. The footage wasn't conclusive enough to identify Patricia specifically, but combined with everything else, it painted a clear picture. I provided the video to Officer Ramirez. 3 days later, Patricia was arrested. It turned out Mike's camera wasn't the only one that had caught her. A neighbor 2 houses down on the other side also had a camera system, and their angle clearly showed Patricia's face as she'd walked past carrying a bag that presumably contained the concrete mix. When confronted with the evidence, Patricia apparently broke down and confessed. She was charged with vandalism and fraud related to the falsified HOA complaints. The local news picked up the story, running a segment about HOA overreach that featured my fountain prominently. The legal process moved slowly, but I kept careful track of everything. Patricia initially tried to fight the charges, claiming she'd been under extreme stress and hadn't been thinking clearly. Her lawyer attempted to argue temporary insanity, which might have been laughable if the situation weren't so serious. The fraud charges related to the falsified complaints were particularly damaging. While HOA disputes are usually civil matters, Patricia had crossed a line by creating false documents and forging signatures. The district attorney's office took the case seriously, especially given that she'd held a position of authority in the community. In the meantime, the HOA board appointed Gerald as interim president. One of his first acts was to approve a reimbursement for my fountain repair using HOA funds, arguing that the damage had occurred directly as a result of an HOA dispute, and the association bore responsibility for Patricia's actions while she was serving as president. The repair cost came to exactly $2,347. The company I hired had to completely replace the pump system, clean out all the concrete residue, and reseal the basin. It took 2 weeks, during which I became acutely aware of how much I'd grown to depend on that fountain's noise masking. The highway traffic sounded so much louder without it. Patricia's criminal case went to trial 4 months later. I was called to testify about the timeline of events, the HOA dispute, and the damage to my property. Sitting in that witness box, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This whole situation had spiraled so far beyond a simple noise complaint. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Wells, walked me through everything methodically. The falsified complaints, the harassment, the vandalism. Patricia's defense attorney, a tired-looking man in his 50s, tried to paint me as someone who'd been intentionally provocative, but it didn't hold water. I'd followed all the rules, checked with the city, and documented everything properly. Dorothy Chen and Robert Marsh also testified, clearly stating they'd never filed complaints, and their signatures on Patricia's documents were forgeries. The Petersons had returned from France by then, and Martha Peterson testified via video link about how disturbing it was to learn someone had used her name to file a false complaint while she was out of the country. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: vandalism, fraud, and falsifying documents. The judge sentenced Patricia to 6 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, and ordered her to pay full restitution for the fountain damage plus punitive damages. Standing outside the courthouse that day, Mike clapped me on the shoulder. "You did the right thing seeing this through." "I just wanted a fountain," I said, which made him laugh, but there was more to it than that. The case had exposed significant problems with how the Riverside Meadows HOA had been operating. Patricia hadn't been keeping proper records, had been making unilateral decisions without board approval, and had been using her position to bully residents who didn't meet her personal standards. The HOA board commissioned an independent audit, which revealed Patricia had also been misappropriating funds. Small amounts, nothing huge, but she'd been using the HOA credit card for personal expenses and disguising them as association costs. That led to additional charges and an extended sentence. The whole situation became something of a cautionary tale in our community. The local homeowners association network started requiring better checks and balances, mandatory training for board members, and clearer procedures for handling complaints. As for me, my fountain was repaired and running perfectly. On warm evenings, I'd sit on my front porch with a beer, listening to the water cascade and mask the highway noise. Neighbors would occasionally stop by to chat, often commenting on how nice the fountain sounded. Gerald stepped down as interim president after a year, and a woman named Helen Foster took over. She was organized and fair-minded, and one of her first initiatives was to create a formal policy about noise mitigation features for properties near the highway. My fountain became the model example, and several other residents installed similar features in their yards. The highway traffic never got quieter, of course. If anything, it seemed to increase as Riverside continued to grow. But with my fountain running, it faded into the background, just pleasant white noise that made my little corner of suburban California feel peaceful. I ran into Patricia's husband, Mark, about a year after the trial. He was at the grocery store, looking tired and defeated. We made eye contact across the produce section, and for a moment I thought he might just ignore me. Instead, he walked over. "I want to apologize," he said quietly, "for everything Patricia did. She wasn't well, hasn't been for a while. I should have recognized the signs, gotten her help before it escalated to all this." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry about the harassment, the vandalism, the months of stress. But Mark looked genuinely remorseful, and I couldn't help but feel some compassion. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "How is she doing?" "Better, actually. The jail time was hard, but she's been in therapy on medication. We're working through things." He paused. "We're probably going to sell the house, move somewhere else, start fresh." "I hope that works out for you both." We parted ways, and I continued my shopping with a strange feeling of closure. The whole ordeal had been exhausting and unnecessary, but it was finally, truly over. The ripple effects continued for years. The HOA became more transparent and resident-friendly. Property values in Riverside Meadows actually increased because people appreciated the more reasonable management. Several articles and even a segment on a national news show featured our community as an example of how HOA reform could work. My fountain, the innocent catalyst for all of this, continued to bubble away. I'd replaced the original lighting with LED strips that changed color, cycling through blues and greens in the evening. Kids in the neighborhood loved it, and it became something of a landmark. "Turn left at the house with the color-changing fountain," people would say when giving directions. 3 years after the initial confrontation with Patricia, I was elected to the HOA board myself. It wasn't something I'd sought out, but several neighbors encouraged me to run, saying they wanted someone with common sense who understood the limits of HOA authority. Serving on the board gave me new perspective on the challenges of managing a community. There were legitimate disputes to mediate, maintenance issues to address, budgets to balance. But we approached everything with transparency and fairness, always remembering the cautionary tale of what happened when power went unchecked. We created a resident feedback system, held quarterly town halls, and published detailed financial reports. When complaints came in, we investigated them properly, contacted all parties involved, and made decisions based on actual evidence rather than personal preference. The fountain issue came up again, but in a different way. A new resident, unfamiliar with the history, asked about the noise ordinance and whether he could install his own water feature. I walked him through the city code, explained the requirements, and helped him find a fountain that would work for his space. His property was also near the highway, and he was thrilled to learn he could do something about the traffic noise. Soon, several houses in our section of the neighborhood had fountains or other water features. The collective effect was remarkable. The entire area seemed quieter, more serene, even though we were surrounded by urban development and busy roads. A local university researcher actually contacted us to study the phenomenon. She was working on her dissertation about urban noise pollution and mitigation strategies. Her study found that our neighborhood, despite being adjacent to a major highway, had higher resident satisfaction scores and lower stress-related health issues compared to similar neighborhoods without noise mitigation features. The research was published in an urban planning journal, and suddenly, our little Riverside community was being cited in discussions about city design and quality of life. City planners from other municipalities reached out to learn about our approach. It was surreal to think that my $3,000 fountain had become part of a larger conversation about how we design communities to be more livable. But that's exactly what happened. Patricia was released from jail after serving 4 months, with the remainder converted to house arrest and community service. Part of her probation required her to attend anger management classes and continued therapy. I saw her once from a distance at a local park where she was doing community service, picking up trash. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. I didn't approach her and she didn't see me. Mark had been right about them moving. They put their house on the market and it sold within a week. The new owners, a young couple with a baby, were delighted with the neighborhood. They came to one of our town halls to introduce themselves, and I found myself thinking about how different their experience would be compared to mine when I'd first moved in. Life settled into a comfortable routine. My fountain ran year-round, except for the occasional maintenance day. I learned to clean the filters regularly, adjust the water flow seasonally, and winterize the system during the rare cold snaps we got in Southern California. The sound became such a constant part of my life that I barely noticed it anymore, except when it wasn't there. Once, the pump failed unexpectedly, and the sudden silence was jarring. I felt exposed somehow, vulnerable to the highway noise that rushed in to fill the void. I fixed it the same day, unable to sleep without that familiar white noise. Other residents shared similar experiences. Helen Foster, the HOA president, told me her fountain had become essential to her mental health. I work from home and the traffic noise was making me crazy. The fountain lets me focus. It's weird how something so simple can make such a difference. That became something of a theme in our community. Simple solutions to improve quality of life. We expanded the philosophy beyond just noise mitigation. We planted more trees to provide shade and reduce heat island effects. We created a community garden where residents could grow vegetables. We organized neighborhood events that brought people together without heavy-handed enforcement of arbitrary rules. The contrast with Patricia's tenure was stark. Under her leadership, the HOA had been about control and conformity. Under the new approach, it was about cooperation and community enhancement. 5 years after the fountain dispute, I was sitting on my porch on a warm Saturday evening when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out, looking around with interest. She approached my porch tentatively. "Excuse me, are you Connor Peterson?" "That's me. I'm Ashley Morgan. I'm a reporter with California Living magazine. I'm doing a story about HOA reform movements, and your case keeps coming up as a turning point example. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I invited her to sit, and we talked for over an hour. She was thorough and knowledgeable, asking insightful questions about not just what happened, but why it mattered. She understood that the fountain dispute was really about power dynamics, accountability, and the importance of checks and balances in community governance. The article came out 2 months later, a 6-page spread with photos of my fountain, interviews with various residents, and a sidebar about the subsequent legal reforms in California HOA law. The state legislature had passed new requirements for HOA transparency and homeowner protections, partly inspired by cases like mine. I received emails and calls from people across the country who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to share their stories. I did my best to help, always emphasizing the importance of knowing your rights, documenting everything, and staying calm even when facing unreasonable opposition. One caller, a man in Arizona, told me my story had given him the courage to fight back against his HOA's attempt to ban solar panels. He won his case, citing similar principles about state and local laws superseding HOA restrictions. Another woman in Texas used my example to challenge her HOA's discriminatory enforcement of rules. She documented how the board targeted certain residents while giving others free passes, and she presented her evidence in a methodical way that led to the entire board being replaced. It was gratifying to know that something positive had come from my frustrating experience, but I also made sure to warn people that fighting an HOA could be exhausting and time-consuming. Pick your battles, I advised. Make sure it's worth the energy you'll have to invest. The fountain itself required replacement after 8 years. The original pump finally gave out beyond repair, and I decided to upgrade the entire system. I went with a more efficient model that used less electricity and had better filtration. The sound was slightly different, a bit more subtle, but still effective at masking the traffic noise. By that point, the fountain had become part of the neighborhood's identity. When I mentioned I'd be replacing it, several neighbors expressed concern that I might choose something different. I assured them the new fountain would be similar, just updated. The installation took 2 days, and during that time, I received multiple visits from neighbors checking on the progress. It was touching, really, how much they'd grown to appreciate this simple water feature. Gerald, who still lived nearby though he was no longer on the HOA board, stopped by with a 6-pack of beer on the evening of the installation. We sat on the porch, listening to the new fountain. "Sounds good," he said. "Maybe a little smoother than the old one." "Better filtration system," I explained. "More even water flow." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fountain burbling away, the highway noise reduced to a distant hum. "You know," Gerald said eventually, "when all that stuff was happening with Patricia, I thought it might tear the community apart. But it actually brought us together, made us think about what kind of neighborhood we wanted to be." "I just wanted a fountain," I said, echoing what I'd told Mike years earlier. Gerald laughed. "Sometimes that's all it takes. One person standing up for something reasonable, and it exposes all the underlying problems that needed to be addressed anyway." We finished our beers and talked about other things. Upcoming HOA projects, changes in the neighborhood, his grandkids. Normal, pleasant conversation between neighbors who genuinely liked each other. That, more than anything else, felt like the real victory. Not winning against Patricia, not the legal vindication, not even the policy changes and media attention. Just being able to sit on my porch, listening to my fountain, having a friendly conversation with a neighbor without drama or conflict. The Riverside Meadows community continued to thrive. Property values increased steadily. New families moved in, drawn by the reasonable HOA and the quality of life. The fountains and water features became such a signature aspect of the neighborhood that the HOA eventually installed a large decorative fountain at the main entrance, a community feature that welcomed residents and visitors alike. I served 2 terms on the HOA board, then stepped down to let new voices take over. The principles we'd established remained in place: transparency, fairness, evidence-based decision-making, and respect for homeowners' rights. Patricia's case became part of the training materials for new board members, a cautionary tale about the consequences of overreach and abuse of power. It was depersonalized in the presentation, focused on the actions rather than the individual, but everyone knew the story. I heard through the community grapevine that Patricia and Mark had moved to Oregon and were doing better. Mark had sent a Christmas card to Gerald one year, mentioning that the fresh start had been good for them both. I was glad to hear it. I'd never wanted to destroy anyone's life, just to protect my own right to enjoy my property. 10 years after installing my first fountain, I was doing routine maintenance on a Saturday morning when a young couple walked by with a stroller. They paused, and the woman smiled at me. "We just moved in down the street," she said. Your fountain is beautiful. Is that why so many houses around here have them? Sort of, I said. There's a whole story behind it. We'd love to hear it sometime. We're thinking about installing one ourselves. The traffic noise from the highway is louder than we expected. I gave them the basics about the city ordinance, the decibel limits, and some recommendations for fountain companies. They thanked me and continued their walk, the baby sleeping peacefully in the stroller. Watching them go, I felt a sense of completion. The neighborhood had evolved, new people were arriving with new stories, but the foundation we'd built remained solid. The next generation of residents would benefit from the battles we'd fought, probably without ever knowing the details. My fountain continued to run, doing exactly what I'd always intended, masking the traffic noise from Highway 91, creating a peaceful environment, improving my quality of life and that of my neighbors. Such a simple thing, really. Water flowing over decorative tiers, creating white noise that transformed an urban environment into something more livable. Sometimes I thought about that morning when Patricia had knocked on my door, her face tight with disapproval, her folder clutched against her chest. If I'd known then where that confrontation would lead, would I have handled things differently? Probably not. Some principles were worth defending, even when the defense was exhausting. The fountain burbled on, indifferent to the history it had created, just doing its job of making water sounds that improved life for everyone within earshot. And really, that was enough. Years continued to pass. I watched the neighborhood children grow up. Some of them, who'd been toddlers when the fountain dispute first happened, were now teenagers. They knew the fountains had always been there, part of the landscape of their childhood. The HOA remained stable and well managed. Disputes still arose occasionally, as they do in any community, but they were handled reasonably and fairly. The specter of Patricia's abuse of power hung in the background, a reminder to all board members of what not to do. I retired from my job in software development and spent more time at home, which meant spending more time listening to my fountain. It had become such an integral part of my environment that I couldn't imagine living without it. On quiet evenings, I'd sit on my porch with a book, the fountain providing its constant backdrop, and I'd feel grateful for the life I'd built in Riverside. The community, the neighbors, the peace I'd fought to protect. All of it centered around one simple water feature that I'd installed because I wanted to reduce highway noise. The irony never escaped me. Patricia had tried to force me to remove the fountain, claiming it was too loud. In reality, the fountain made everything quieter. If she'd just taken the time to understand that, to actually investigate rather than jumping to enforcement, none of the subsequent drama would have happened. But then again, if none of it had happened, the HOA might have continued down its path of overreach and abuse. Other residents might have been targeted for equally arbitrary reasons. The reforms might never have occurred. Sometimes conflict, as uncomfortable as it is, serves a greater purpose. It exposes problems that need addressing and creates opportunities for positive change. My fountain dispute had done exactly that for Riverside Meadows. As I approached the 15-year mark of living in my house, with my fountain still running faithfully, I felt a deep sense of contentment. I'd stood up for what was right, endured the harassment and vandalism, seen justice served, and helped create lasting positive change in my community. The fountain continued its endless cycle, water flowing down the 3 tiers, creating that perfect white noise that masked the highway sounds and made my corner of California feel like a peaceful sanctuary. And every time I heard it, I was reminded that sometimes the smallest things, the simplest choices, can have profound impacts that ripple outward in ways we never expect. My fountain wasn't just a fountain anymore. It was a symbol of reasonable resistance against unreasonable authority, a reminder that homeowners have rights, and a testament to the power of standing up for what's fair and just, even when facing intimidating opposition. And it still, after all these years, did exactly what I'd installed it to do. It masked the traffic noise from Highway 91, making my home a more pleasant place to live. Simple as that.